I think we finished the first chapter last week. Just by way of recapping, Arjuna was a warrior, which meant specifically that he was empowered to commit violence for the good of society. And certainly we all believe that violence can be used for a just and good purpose. If you want to verify that, you need only attempt to think of, through a thought experiment, a scenario where violence would be justified, called for, morally acceptable, and even the non-committal of violence would itself be a crime of negligence. Usually the kind of thought experiments I like to do involve the life of children or the welfare of children, and you just stack enough children up against a criminal. So if you don't kill this criminal, then 10 million children will suffer and die. Or 100 million children, or 1 billion, or every child on the planet today, or every child that's ever existed in the past and will ever exist in the future. At some point, a criminal who would hurt those children, and if you could stop that person from doing so, then that would be the justifiable use of violence. Then, you might start with non-lethal force, but then you just have to do another addendum to the thought experiment, and you have to ask yourself, what if the non-lethal force didn't work? And the only way to stop the crime from being committed was to use lethal force. I've yet to encounter a person who at some point doesn't, with enough stacked up on one side versus the single death on the other side, doesn't say, okay, in that circumstance, violence would be justified. Once they acknowledge that, then the question just becomes, at what point is violence justified? It's no longer a conversation about whether or not violence is ever justified, but rather it's a conversation about at what point does violence become justified. And the existence of police forces and armies and peacekeeping forces and laws which carry with them punishments that have to be meted out by a group of people to offenders or criminals. The mere existence of laws of any sort that people are compelled to follow through some form of social contract theory which breaks a natural order of might equals right, which of course is just the entire legal system is based on your ability to commit violence. And when we talk about legal systems, we're talking about the regulation of violence and the creation of a class of lawyers who are deputed with the responsibility of meting out that violence on behalf of the legislative and judicial branches of government, however they're conceived of. There has to be an executor of that violence, somebody who's willing to put themselves in harm's way and commit violence for the good of the nation or the group, whatever that group might consist of. Did you guys follow that? Hang on, I'm just trying to pin myself here. Here we go. So Arjuna was a warrior. And his job was to mete out justice, which really means to commit violence when appropriate. And an appropriate circumstance for violence arose. What was that appropriate circumstance? That was a genocidal wiping out and the raping and pillaging of an entire society, and Arjun was uniquely positioned in such a way that he was able to stop that. And so with no other reasonable recourse, he and his army arrayed themselves in the battlefield, outnumbered significantly, 1.6 to 1. Don't pick your nails. Thank you. 1.6 to 1. And they were going to engage in a just and appropriate war to defend the innocent. The problem, and what turns the Gita into a real moral dilemma, isn't that. That's relatively easy to navigate through, but what really turns the Gita into a moral dilemma is that Arjuna had to fight against his teachers and relatives. And so the war became a fratricidal, patricidal war. He had to fight against his fathers and his friends and cousins. And to make it simple, you could say that everyone that Arjuna cared the most about in the whole world was on the bad guy's side. So now it's the fate of the world versus everything you hold dear. And it was also Arjuna's teachers and his grandfather. It wasn't just, it was the people he respected the most in the world, as well as his family members that he had to fight against. And so Arjuna had a crisis of faith. He had a nervous breakdown. He had an existential crisis as well, where he was forced to question everything he held dear, figure out what to do. And his initial statements to Krishna, they followed a particular flow. So he started with a personal, hedonic, utilitarian argument, where he said, I won't be happy. So it was personal, I won't be happy. It was hedonic, it was about maximizing pleasure. The other type of utilitarian argument is minimizing pain. And those are two different things. Maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain are two different things. You could minimize pain and have no pleasure in life and just reduce pain. You could undergo pain for a higher happiness that comes after that pain. And so achieving pleasure and reducing pain are not the same thing, which is why there's a positive and a negative ends-based ethic. The ends justifies the means, a results-based ethics. You want to get the right result, and you do whatever is required to get yourself the result you want. And that position is called utilitarianism. And so Arjuna started out with a personal, my own happiness, not collective, not about the world. Hedonic, my own pleasure. Utilitarian, results-based argument. And that segued into a collective argument. How will any of us be happy? And then that segued into a duty-based ethical argument called a deontological argument, based on the idea that, you should do the right thing irrespective of the consequences. And in this case, that was not killing family members, not committing violence for any reason. And so that was his next level of argumentation. Personal pleasure, collective pleasure, and then this is actually fundamentally wrong. It's adharmic, it's pop, it's sin, it's adharmic. And he ran with this argument. And in fact, he ran with this argument and merged it with the first argument. We will kill our relatives and commit sin, then adharma will arise, then unwanted progeny from the degradation of women who are unprotected at that point, and then as a result of that, then the jati dharma and the kula dharma will cease to happen, and people will cease to do our offerings and our welfare activities, and then society will collapse. And so it's a much larger collective argument about that, bad things will happen, good things will stop happening. And so he's really merged the fundamental wrongness with the bad results. Now you have a modified argument where it's the wrong thing and it gives a bad result. And it's actually a stronger argument. And it's not just for me and my clansmen, it's for the whole collective, in the entire society. And it's important to note that Arjuna's argument about what happens to society and the protection of women and things like that might be seen as patriarchal is totally irrelevant, because his argument fails and Krishna never even bothers to address it. Krishna ignores Arjuna's argument entirely and speaks the Gita. And mildly, for a couple of verses later on in the text, addresses the idea that it's not wrong for a warrior to fight, but never really deals with his argument about destroying society. In fact, he argues the opposite. He says, if you don't set a good example by fighting, then everyone will shirk their duty and you'll destroy society by doing that. So he actually reverses the argument on Arjuna completely. In the 3rd chapter, he addresses the valor and the justification for warriors to fight in the 2nd chapter, but he never really just kind of head-on even appreciates Arjuna's argument on any level. And so whether Arjuna's argument succeeds or fails, whether it represents the worldview at that time of the world or not, is just wholly irrelevant. The Gita is about a different subject. So we can appreciate, maybe even dive into these arguments, learn something about the culture that the Gita grew out of. But really, the truth is, you could actually skip the entire 1st chapter of the Gita and just start with the 2nd chapter, and you'd be fine. You'd be fine. A comprehensive knowledge of the text does require you to read the 1st chapter and study it. It also requires you to read the entire Mahabharata. But to get the essence of the Gita, the most important message of the Gita, everything you need to achieve self-realization, you could skip over the 1st chapter. And so we shouldn't read too much into Arjuna's line of argumentation. We should rather appreciate Arjuna's crisis of faith and see how it mirrors our own. And the chapter finishes with Arjuna saying, Arjuna, having thus spoken on the battlefield, cast aside his bow and arrows and sat down in the chariot, his mind overwhelmed with grief. Soka samvigna manaha. His mind was disturbed by grief. Vigna means agitated. Samvigna, completely agitated. Shoka samvigna manasaha. His mind was completely agitated by grief. And in fact, this chapter is when they titled the chapters, at some point they started titling the chapters of the Gita. At least it was done 1,500 years ago, perhaps earlier. This chapter is traditionally titled Vishada Yoga, the yoga of distress, the yoga of sadness, the yoga of lamentation. The word shoka would be a synonym for Vishada. And so it's Arjuna's way of connecting, Arjuna's way of connecting with Krishna in this chapter is through his lamentation. Which is interesting because it does tell us something, which is that people have to go to a dark place sometimes to see the light. Sometimes you got to go through some difficulty. I think it's attributed to the Prime Minister of England during World War II, Winston Churchill. It's attributed to him. I've never actually done a research, I've never actually Googled to make sure it was spoken by him. But the famous statement attributed to Winston Churchill is, if you're going through hell, keep going. Yeah, that's attributed to him. If you're going through hell, by all means, keep going. And so sometimes you have to go through some difficulty in order to get something good. That's just part of life. Suffering is on the table. It's really a question of what will you suffer for? What will you struggle for? What will you strive for? But the idea of living a life of leisure with no suffering whatsoever isn't even on the table, because old age and disease and the death of your loved ones automatically creates suffering regardless. Like, you don't have to do anything. You can spend your whole life trying to avoid suffering, and it will attend to you in due course of time automatically. You don't even need to do anything. In fact, you can do everything in your power to avoid suffering, and it won't stop. You're good. Keep working. You're good. Don't get dicey and leave. I think that's really the lesson that we should sit with from the first chapter. That there's some value in suffering, and that you are going to lament and have a crisis of faith at some time, an existential dilemma. You're going to question the very ground you walk on, and that's part of the journey. That's part of the journey. Yeah. Now Arjuna, is in this super distressed state, and seeing Arjuna full of compassion, so now he's kripaya avishtam. He had entered into a state of compassion. His mind depressed, his eyes full of tears. Madhusudan Krishna. Here's Vishidantam. He was lamenting. That's where the word Vishada comes from. And so he was lamenting. And then Krishna spoke these words. Now Krishna's called Madhusudan here. So the killer of the Madhu demon, or the one who gives something sweet, is more of what we call a folk etymology, a poetic way of looking at Krishna as the person who gave Dan that which is sweeter su than honey, madhu. And so this term Madhusudan is used to indicate that Krishna was the demon, the killer of the demon Madhu. Madhu and Kaitab were killed by Krishna in one of his incarnations. And so that's one understanding of the term Madhusudan. And so if you were to read this epithet for Krishna as having some meaning, then the meaning would be that Krishna is the killer of Arjuna's doubts. Otherwise, you could say that Krishna gives that thing sweeter than honey. He gave the Gita, which is filled with teachings about bhakti, and therefore he was about to enlighten Arjuna. And so you could interpret the word Madhusudan either way, but oftentimes when you see a particular title, which is called an epithet, used for Krishna or Arjuna, it's intended to teach you something about the mood of the conversation at that point. And so you find that Krishna is rarely addressed just as Krishna. Arjuna is rarely addressed just as Arjuna. Rather, Arjuna gets addressed as Mahabahu, a great-armed one, strong-armed one. When Krishna's telling him you're being weak, he'll say, oh, strong-armed one, why are you speaking so weakly? Or Parantapa, the scorcher of foes, the burner of your enemies. Tapas and Parantapa, the scorcher, the burner of another. Tap means to burn, to heat. That's where you get the word tapasya from. And so Parantapa is the burner of his foes, the destroyer of his foes. And so Krishna will say, why are you lamenting to fight? You're known as the scorcher of your foes. Why not pick up your bow and do what you were put on God's green earth to do? So like this, Arjuna will call Krishna certain names. Krishna will call Arjuna names. Sanjaya will jump in and call each one of them names. And it teaches you something about the mood of those verses. And again, that's more of an intermediate level of analysis of the verses. So what did Krishna say? Krishna said, how have these impurities come upon you? Kashmalam. Kashmalam. How has this dirt, these impurities come upon you? They are not at all befitting a man who knows the value of life. Anarya jushtam. They are not fitting. They are fitting and anarya. Arya means cultured. It's where the Aryan Brotherhood is a mispronunciation of Aryan. By the way, you know the word swastika? Hitler never used the term swastika. Swastika is a Sanskrit term used for the Sanskrit symbol, which Hitler reversed and turned on its side. But he never called that symbol a swastika. That symbol was called a swastika by Hindus. And they're banning swastikas in schools, which is probably a really good idea. But Hindu groups are up in arms about it because they're like, wait a second. We've had this symbol for thousands of years in our tradition. And it got co-opted by a guy for a few years in the 30s and 40s. Maybe 10 years was the whole shebang. I can't imagine the swastika was around for more than 10 years, from 35 to 1945. And it wasn't even called a swastika, and it wasn't even a swastika. It was reversed and turned on its side, like an upside-down cross. So if like some Satanists do an upside-down cross, which is one of the satanic symbols, do you then ban crosses in school? And they certainly have a longer history of doing upside-down crosses in Satanism. Do you then ban crosses forever? You follow? Anyway, so some Hindu groups are getting upset about this. The problem with Hindu rights organizations is they're Hindu, and so they end up being kind of chill, and so the result is they don't get a whole lot done. You get yourself a good atheist group, a feminist group, a Muslim group, a Christian evangelical group, a conservative group. These groups, they're ready to take it to the streets. Ultra-right, a white power group, black power group, BLM group, whatever it is. Most of these special interest groups, whether you like them or not, they've learned the art of making a scene. Hindus have just not pulled it together. They're just too peaceful. Like Buddhist groups, even Buddhist groups sometimes get really edgy. Traditional Buddhist monks in Thailand or Burma will get upset about something and just pour gasoline on themselves and immolate themselves in public. Just go big. Just go real big. That happens a lot. Actually, sometimes Hindus will do that too. So of course, even then, it's like, it doesn't really create that much drama. You just killed yourself. You didn't really create any havoc in society. I mean, they might have to clean up the mess you made, but it's really just bringing out a janitorial crew to clean up the mess you made, killing yourself. And so this idea of, I'm so upset that you let me shoot myself in the face, or let me shoot myself in the foot, or let me stab myself in the heart to show you how upset I am. It still ends up being pretty nonviolent from the point of view of society, because you haven't really given anybody a reason to change their position. Anyway, so this word Arya, this was borrowed by Hitler, and it became the Aryan Brotherhood. The same language is used here, 1,000 years ago. Anarya Jushtam. It's befitting someone who is anarya, which means like theist and atheist. It's the opposite. Anarya Jushtam. It's befitting a non-Aryan. It's a huge insult. It's a really big insult. They lead not to higher planets. So they don't go to aswargyam akirti karam. They lead you away from heaven, and they lead to their akirti. They lead to, kirti means glorification, kirtan means glorification. And so akirti means they lead to infamy. They don't lead to heaven. They're not befitting an Aryan. And it's kashmala. Kutas tva kashmala midam. Where has this come from? Where has this come from? Why has this come to you? Kutas, where? Where has this come from? And so it's a rhetorical question. He's criticizing Arjuna. So I think it's interesting that Krishna is just, well, let's keep reading. Do not yield to this degrading impotence. Klib means impotence. Klybium, impotence. It's a term used for eunuchs. It's a super insulting term to call a man, to accuse him of being kliba or impotent, or accuse him of klybium or of impotency. It's a huge insult. It's a huge insult. I mean, at this point, from the point of view of Sanskrit literature, Krishna has called Arjuna every dirty name in the book. He said, you eunuch, will never go to heaven, who will go down as infamous, who are dirty, and who are anarya, which is like, it's just such a mega criticism, because the Aryan is his clan. So it's like saying you're not a member of the human race, practically speaking. In a tribal culture, it's almost like saying you're not a member of the human race. You're not. For us, it would be like saying to somebody, you're not even a devotee, bro. You sound like a karmi. I'm getting karmi vibes from you all day and night. And to accuse somebody of impotence using language which is used for castrated males, for eunuchs, I mean, even in today's society, them's fighting words. And so why is Arjuna beating up on this? Why is Krishna beating up on this poor Arjuna? What is Krishna's problem? Arjuna's having a serious crisis of faith here. He's reaching out to Krishna, and Krishna's just assassinating him. It does not become you. Give up such petty weakness of heart. Hridaya dorbalyam. Hridaya dorbalyam. Kshudram. It's different than shudra, but kshudram means petty. Hridaya dorbalyam means weakness of heart. He just won't stop. You got a weak heart. You're weak. You're a eunuch. You're impotent. You're not going to heaven. You'll become infamous. You're not even a devotee. You're not even a member of our tribe. You're petty. This doesn't become you. Like, what else can Krishna say at this point? Give up this petty weakness of heart. Tyaktva utishta parantapa. You are the scorcher of your foes. You're sitting down like a eunuch. Get up. Tyaktva, give it up. Give up this weakness of heart, this petty weakness of heart, all this nonsense. And utishta, get up. Literally, utishta means get up. So he's sitting down in the chariot, and Krishna's like, get up, dude. Like, what do you, get up. Certainly not how we would expect the Gita to start. The Upanishad that is the Gita, with its, epic and majestic and otherworldly teachings on spirituality. Krishna's egging him on and berating him, and it sounds more locker room talk than, or maybe the kind of advice you get in your corner in between rounds in a fight. I digress, but there's a famous clip you can watch. One of the greatest boxers in the history of the world is Floyd Mayweather Jr. And Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s father is Floyd Mayweather Sr., who's a felon and, is by all accounts not the nicest guy in the world. And he was an okay boxer, but man, is he a good coach. And so Floyd Mayweather, who's 50-0 in his professional career, practically the only guy to ever go 50-0. I don't think there's another boxer in the history of the world who's ever gone 50-0, undefeated his whole career. He's retired now. Floyd Mayweather, he was in between rounds, and his father was screaming at him, which is, he's famous for doing this in between rounds. So it's his dad, like his father, and his father is just, you know, a roughneck kind of guy, and he was screaming at him, "What are you doing, you fool? You got to bip, bop." And Floyd's like, "I got that." It's like, "What do you don't know what I'm talking about. What do I say? You want to bip him, and then bop." And so I was like, "All right, get out there and do it." So this almost sounds more like that. I mean, it's, you know, obviously it's more philosophical, and Krishna's using more, not four-letter words, but more insults. He's got a wider repertoire of insults. But it really, like, what's Krishna doing here? I think, in addition to us not wanting to admit that we need to suffer to grow, and that not suffering is not an option in this lifetime, and the question just becomes, who do you throw in with, and what do you suffer for? Who do you throw in with, and what do you suffer for? To suffer or not isn't actually on the menu. It's just, what will you suffer for? What higher value, what thing greater than yourself will you suffer for? What will you elevate to the level of something worthy of your suffering? Your sensual gratification, money, family, take your pick. From the lowest infantile level of sensual indulgence all the way up to the human race or God and country, whatever it might be. Similarly, most of us need to be chastised. Guru Govinda Maharaj, one of the greatest Vaishnavas I ever met, was famous for chastising people. He would actually hit his disciples with his cane during class in the temple. He had his cane. His disciples would all sit really close to him, right on top of him practically, so that he wouldn't have to reach very far, and so if he wanted to crack him, he could get to him easily. So they'd sit right here at his feet, like all around him, and it was a badge of honor to sit right there and take your licks. And Maharaj was brilliant to such an extent that it was otherworldly, to such an extent that you would have the realization that Krishna was speaking through him. And he was just, when he would speak, he would become like a lion. He was, you know, his legs did not work well. He couldn't even bow down on his own. He would sort of fall forward to get down, and his disciples would lower him down. And it was time for him to get up from offering obeisance. He would kind of put his arms out. His disciples would grab his arms and pick him back up again. He was elderly. When most of the senior Vaishnavas in ISKCON were in their 40s, he was in his 60s. He was a whole generation older than them. Joined ISKCON at a much older age. Anyway, his story is right out of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the way he grew up. But he was fierce. And he would chastise. And he said one time that, "I have to chastise you Westerners because otherwise you'll have to take another birth to learn humility." He didn't always chastise. Sometimes he was sweet as could possibly be. And it was this incredible mix of yin and yang, like peanut butter and chocolate, or like, you know, pina colada, whatever your favorite combination is, of just absolute ferocity and just heart-melting sweetness. Most of us need to be chastised in life. Most of us will go down the wrong road. most of us need to be corrected strongly. We don't listen when people do stuff nicely. We're not subtle enough to appreciate the hint. We have to get slapped in the face with the truth before it sinks in. And honestly, most of your beginning spiritual life is spent learning how to take chastisement and correction and be rigorously honest with yourself and question your values and question your misconceptions and just learning how to be tabula rasa, a blank slate, and learning how to receive instruction. Once you get to that humble place, without giving up your independent power of thought, then wisdom can just be poured into you like a receptacle. You don't lose your power of thought and your ability to discern truth from falsity. But you have to give up your ego, which causes you to close your ears and not receive truth. You have to give up your ego, which causes you to unnecessarily defend yourself, ad nauseum, because you can't stand to admit that you're wrong, that your worldview is wrong, that's deficient in some categorical way, that you're selfish, that you're materialistic, that you're self-centered, that you're self-absorbed, that you're running, that you're not all that you're not there yet, that you still have miles to go before you sleep, that you're a newbie, that you're an acolyte, that you're a neophyte, that you're half a step away from falling down. It'll be a miracle if you make it 10 years in devotional service. We just don't want to hear that. We don't want to own that, even though it's true. And so we find all sorts of ways, aggressively, passive-aggressively, defensively, to shut our ears, to defend ourselves, to protect our fragile egos. And it's severely debilitating. It's crippling. And it all but ensures that your path will be minute and micronic and microscopic and extremely slow. Give me some space, man. It's too much for me. Just for a minute. Come back in 30 seconds. It all but ensures that our growth will be extremely slow and that there's every chance we'll fall. Krishna understands this. That just because you're having a crisis of faith, just because you're having doubts, that just because you sound sincere for 5 minutes doesn't mean that you are actually sincere. It's funny, but sometimes you don't want to forgive somebody or be merciful to somebody or be kind to somebody because you feel they don't deserve it because they're jerky. You guys ever feel that way? You know what I'm talking about, Reed? Let me say it again, and why don't you guys actually answer my question by really thinking about it. Sometimes you don't want to be charitable and magnanimous and loving and appreciative and grateful and well-wishing on somebody because you feel they've wronged you and haven't made amends. And so you hold on to some bitterness or some resentment or some anger because you want to see that justice is done and you don't feel like they've done right by you. Do you know what I'm talking about? Good. You don't need to do that. You can let go. Just imagine that they made amends. If you're a decent soul and somebody makes amends with you, you will wish well upon them. So why not just assume that at some point in their life they felt bad about what they did, give them credit for it, and wish well on them. If your well-wishing is so cheap that all they need to do is make amends with you and try to make things right, then why don't you just go ahead and just take it in your life that they've already done that for you. And wish them well. And be peaceful. And just like forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, wishing well upon everybody is a gift you give yourself. Unless you're a teacher. Then you can't let people off the hook. Because if you let them off the hook, you're doing them a disservice, so you have to correct them. Somebody has to be there in somebody's life to correct them, just like somebody was there to correct you. At some point, you have to be that hammer to help that other person go deep. They get to be the nail, you get to be the hammer. Arjuna is being taught by Krishna. Krishna can't let him off the hook. If he lets him off the hook, bad things will happen. If somebody is not your responsibility, then let them off the hook. Krishna's more than qualified to take care of them and help them go where they need to go. You don't need to worry your pretty little head about it. Move on. Learn your lessons. Learn how to be people's well-wisher. Learn how not to hold a grudge. Learn how to forgive. Learn how to move forward. You'll be so much happier. Learn that art and science. If they've ever apologized, take it that that's enough. Even if they reverse course later. If you think they might have had a good thought, let that be sufficient. If they haven't, realize that's like their own misfortune. The least you can do is wish them well. If you feel they won't learn their lesson, don't worry. Krishna will teach them their lesson. You don't have to be the arbiter of justice. Who gave you that job? Give up your own pettiness. Grow up. And from that position, you're going to have to teach people sometimes, because they come to you and they are your students and they require guidance, and if it doesn't come from you, it's not going to come from anybody, and you are actually in that position where you have to step into harm's way and put some skin in the game. And you see what Krishna's doing here now. He's fomenting the problem. He's bringing it to a header. He's pushing Arjuna. He's grinding him. Everybody needs this sometimes. And just like we don't want to admit that we need to suffer to learn, we don't want to admit that we need to be chastised sometimes to learn. We think, oh, why couldn't that person be nicer to me? Why were they so mean? They must have some issue. Maybe they don't actually have an issue. Maybe you're so dense and so daft that unless they scream at you, you won't get it. And they care enough about your welfare that they blast you to teach you a lesson. Maybe that's what's going on. If it's their issue, if they've got the problem, probably their advice will be garbage. If they're really so unevolved, it's all about them, it's not about you, then if you're smart, you'll be able to suss out that their advice is lousy. But when their advice is perfect, and it hurts you to admit it, and you can't stand it, then probably their heaviness is just what the doctor ordered too. This is a valuable lesson we learned from Krishna and Arjuna in their little back and forth prior to the outset of the Gita. Arjuna has to get into a place where he can really hear. You know you're in a bad place with me when I tell you, hey, I'm just going to try this one more time and I'm going to give up. And let it go. If I ever say that to you, it means you pushed it too far and I no longer feel empowered to help you. And it's become, now the service is to let you go and make your mistake. Because it's not healthy to indulge someone past a certain point who doesn't demonstrate sincerity. And so the appropriate punishment is to let him go and still wish him well, and still have good thoughts about him and have gratitude, but just let him go. Krishna is such a good guru. He's not letting Arjuna out of his firm grasp for even a moment. And Arjuna is sincere. He's not offending Krishna. He fights a little. He kicks and screams. You'll see it in a minute. Arjuna doesn't go down without a fight, but there's a healthy exchange, and Arjuna is gradually beaten into submission by Krishna. And then the Gita can commence. So you don't even have to read the first chapter. You also don't have to read this portion of the second chapter. You can start around verse 10 or 11, and you're good to go. But there are lessons to be learned, even from this wrap-up we're encountering. Arjuna says, O killer of enemies, O killer of Madhu. So you're Madhusudan, you're Arisudan. You're the killer of your enemies, you're the killer of Madhu. You're not the killer of your friends and family. You're asking me to kill my friends and family. You're the killer of your enemies. You're the killer of these demons, but you don't kill your friends and family. So why are you asking me to kill my friends and family? You see the sass? How can I counteract with arrows in battle men like Bhishma and Drona who are worthy of my worship? They're puja arham. They're deserving of worship. They're puja arham. But you want me to shoot them and kill them. And the most important people in Arjuna's life on that battlefield were Bhishma and Drona, his grandfather and his guru. They were on the bad guy's side. That's why I said it wasn't just his family members he had to fight, many of them, his cousins and so on. But he had to actually kill his guru and kill his grandfather. It didn't ultimately fall to him to kill them, but he had to be involved in their death. And his army killed them. And so the commentators on this verse say, Arjuna is really saying, hey Krishna, I'm supposed to offer them puja with flowers, not shoot them with arrows. I should be raining flowers over them, not raining arrows over them. And the commentators pluck out and flesh out the meaning of the verse. And when you read the commentary, you're like, oh, wow, that's exactly what he's communicating. They're worthy of my worship. What do you worship with? You offer flowers. Well, what are you telling me to offer them? The sharp tip of my arrow. How can I do that? And the most important people in his life, his guru and his grandfather, because his father passed away when he was young. He was raised by his grandfather. So his grandfather was his father. His father and his guru were killed by him. What could be more painful? So he's still there. Arjuna's still in the fight. He's not going down. But he's staying, he's keeping it respectful. He's not being totally... Usually people just get spastic and say dumb stuff and make ad hominem attacks and start to criticize you and get on your case and make it out like there's something wrong with you. Usually low-minded people go there. Right? Arjuna's not like such low-minded people. He keeps it philosophical. He thinks he's got a leg to stand on. I mean, it doesn't sound... Arjuna's arguments sound pretty good. I thought Arjuna was going to win the argument. The first time I read the Gita, I thought Arjuna's arguments sound better. I had to read the whole Gita to appreciate Krishna's line of argumentation. But initially, I thought Arjuna's argument sounded solid. It'd be better to live in this world by begging than to live at the cost of the lives of great souls who are my teachers. Even though desiring worldly gain, they are superiors. If they are killed, everything we enjoy will be tainted by blood. Again, it's back to this deontological / utilitarian argument. Everything we enjoy is tainted by blood. It's fundamentally wrong. We won't enjoy. Better we do it this way. You see him navigating really expertly and trying to make a multivalent, multifaceted argument that has both a duty-based as well as a results-based ethic in it. It's quite brilliant. It's poetic. Tainted by blood. Such flash language, isn't it? And as a warrior, the one thing you're never allowed to do is beg. If you want to start a fight with a warrior, insult them and ask them to tolerate your insult. You want to start a fight with a warrior? Like there's certain things you can say to, I'm not going to repeat them, but there's certain things you can say to people in prison or on the street, like within like a thug society. And if you just say those few words, it means you're fighting. There's certain words you can say, certain words in the English language. If you say them to somebody, of a particular mentality, it's growing out of prison cultures. There's just certain things a man doesn't say to another man. If you say it on sight immediately, no matter who's present, you start to fight. And so asking a Kshatriya to beg, making a Kshatriya a beggar, making a warrior into a beggar is, practically speaking, the most offensive thing, and Arjuna's even going there. And think, better I become a beggar. Something I would rather die 1,000 times over than be reduced to. I'll even do that. He's really trying to make an emphatic argument. Most people don't have any dignity. And so you can hurl all kinds of insults at people and they just tolerate it. But like there's certain things you just cannot say, or it's just the moment those words come out of your mouth. It's not even on sight. It's not like the next time I see you. It's right there on the spot. And so to tell a Kshatriya to beg, to call him a beggar, to try to make him a beggar, it's the worst thing ever. They'd rather die or kill anybody, anything, than be reduced to that. It's the very antithesis of the warrior class. And Arjuna's even saying, better I become a beggar. That's how distasteful and repulsive this whole thing is to me. Again, you can see how appreciating something about the Vedic culture, about the culture that the Gita grew out of, it can actually intensify or add a new dimension of appreciation to the verses which are being spoken, although it's not absolutely necessary. It's not absolutely necessary. But it does add another level of another layer of meaning or appreciation or depth to the verses. Nor do we know which is better, conquering them or being conquered by them. If we kill the sons of Dhritarashtra, we should not care to live, yet they're now standing before us on the battlefield. Now he's sounding all fancy and like deep, profound. He's waxing eloquent. Nor do we even know what is better, to be killed by them or to kill them. And it's just how strange it is that they're standing before us. He's getting really philosophical. Now I'm confused about my duty, have lost all composure because of miserly weakness. In this condition I'm asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I am your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. So this karpanya dosha, I have this fault of being weak. I'm bewildered. I'm disturbed. My mind is myopic. It's small. Karpanya in this case means miserly. Miserly means small-minded, narrow-minded. I'm not able to see it. I'm not broad-minded. I can't see. I don't have clarity. And then Pricham Tvam Dharma Samuda Chetasa. Prichami Tvam. I am asking you, Yat Shreya, what is best? Syan Nishchitam Bruhi Tanme. You please tell me definitively what is best for me. And what is in my shreyas, what is in my best interest. Because I'm dharma samuda chetasa. My mind is bewildered about dharma. I'm confused. Samuda is from mu, it means to be confused. I've become completely confused about what my dharma is. So I'm asking you tell me for certain what is best for me. Shishasteham, I am your disciple. Shadimam, instruct me. Tvam prapanam, I'm surrendered to you. This is the rasa sandhi. This is the change in mood in Arjuna and Krishna's relationship, where Arjuna stops arguing and gets to a place where he's actually willing to hear. He admits, I don't know. I trust you. You've earned my trust. Give me some guidance. This is the beginning of the Gita. The Gita starts when you get to that place in your life. And you get to that place in your life, and then you never leave. You know, blessed is that person who finds a good teacher. Then the rest of your life, please instruct me. When my gurus come, I find questions to ask them that make me look bad, so they can chastise me and correct me. I dig as deep as I can, but I don't mind throwing myself under the bus, making myself look as bad as possible. I also want them to be proud of me. When it comes to instruction, I try to be as guilelessly honest as humanly possible about exactly what I struggle with, so they have all the pieces of the puzzle so they can guide me. And a good mentor is priceless in life. It's the greatest thing ever. It's the most important thing in life. And if you find a good mentor, you're always a student. You're always open to receiving instruction. You always want to be taught something new. Your guru's always more advanced. He's always moving up. If he's not, he's no longer your teacher. And if he's moving forward, you're moving forward, you're always in a position where he has incredible insight to offer you. A good teacher just helps you to hack into life at such a high level, going so far beyond what you could ever do on your own. It lets you stand on the shoulders of giants, lets you see so much further than you could possibly see on your own. Is the greatest blessing someone can have in life. A qualified teacher. An unqualified teacher is the worst thing you can have in life. It's the worst curse. A qualified teacher is the greatest blessing you can have in life. It doesn't stop you from using your own intelligence. It's like a good set of glasses. It lets you see things with unlimitedly more clarity, and your mind becomes sharpened. And when your mind becomes fully sharpened, you have unlimitedly more appreciation for them because of what they gave you. You can see even more clearly how valuable what they gave you is. You can see even more clearly how much more advanced they are than you. And your appreciation and gratitude grows without limit, right back to God. You're grateful to them in the spiritual world. And so Arjuna was blessed. He had a good teacher in Krishna. He fought a little bit. But eventually he got to this place. And his humility was uncovered, and his sincerity was on full display. And he got out of his system, and he was able to humble himself, and then Krishna could begin instructing. And Krishna's service at that point was to create that humility, to create that environment, and that required some savagery, some ferocity, some aggressiveness, some chastisement to break Arjuna down, to melt him in order to make him. You don't lose your freedom by finding a teacher. You find your freedom. You become infinitely more introspective and thoughtful and deep and profound. All right, that's all we have time for. Thank you, IGTV.